Hi, Lee Robinson here from American Sentinel K9. The purpose of this video is to briefly describe why I do what I do and how that has impacted the way we have gone about things here at American Sentinel K9. Well, for as long as I can remember, I've had dogs, since I was a little child, and several of those dogs had genetic disease when I was a kid, and my parents were buying dogs. They weren't dog experts, but I became really bonded to those animals, and they were some of my best friends. And growing up, we had dogs that had heart disease and epilepsy and things like that, and it just it bothered me to see that these animals that we cared about had genetic disease and breeders weren't making a major effort to prevent it. Another thing that bothered me was animals just weren't really expected to be healthy and fit. They were kind of like prisoners in their own body, and I felt like it's a crime to it's a form of animal abuse, in my opinion, to purposefully mutate an animal and try to make it in a deformed phenotype where it has a hard time even just climbing up and down steps or breathing especially on a hot day. So these are things that bothered me, and I was pretty much an active outdoorsman for most of my youth. I rode a lot of bikes, did a lot of hiking, did some kayaking, some camping, and when I would take my dogs with me, a lot of times I found myself leaning on a tree, taking more water breaks than I needed because I was waiting on an animal to recover. And I felt like this is just kind of ironic, because I knew that wild animals were vastly superior to their domestic counterparts. So I began to ask, why is this? And a lot of it has to do with how registries are designed. So when we designed our registry here at American Sentinel K9, which is the American Sentinel K9 Association, we designed our registry differently, or different from the status quo, in order to prevent these problems and to maintain the health and well-being of not only what I produce, but the breed as a whole for generations to come. And our registry is the only one of its kind that I know of, and it's modeled after natural selection. So I am a school teacher by trade. Biology is actually what I teach, and so I'm going to illustrate how natural selection keeps animals healthy and fit. And then I'm also going to explain how that has impacted our program and allowed us to use adaptation. I'm not going to call it evolution, because evolution is the production of new species, but it's a modification of the current species. So through selective breeding, modifications have occurred within the gene pool. Okay, so the steps of natural selection. The first step is overproduction. Now, I don't have enough room here, so we're just going to make that fit. It's a little sloppy. The overproduction of offspring. Okay, maybe I should turn this sideways. That will probably help. So the first step of natural selection, like I said, is the overproduction of offspring. This doesn't mean we want to be a puppy mill. It just means that if we want to be a successful breeder that's improving the gene pool, we're going to have to produce more dogs or more animals than what we need in the population. And of course, this means some sort of culling measure is going to have to be required, so we select from the best individuals in the population. Now, some people use euthanasia for culling, but spaying or neutering is completely fine. There's nothing wrong with spaying or neutering a dog, and there's also nothing wrong with having that dog go to a pet home where it's not going to be allowed to breed. Hold on just a second. Okay, I thought I heard something out there. I just wanted to check. So the second step of natural selection is genetic variation. There's variation within the population. And I'm just going to put pop. because of limited space. So we have overproduction of offspring and then genetic variation. Not all the individuals in the gene pool are identical. There's a distribution of phenotype. And I've got another short board here. So let's just make something very simple. Let's compare two different forms of the same trait. We could say height. We have short and we have tall. Okay, and there's a bell-shaped curve distribution in a population of how many individuals. This is the number of individuals in the population that express this phenotype, this body type. So we have very few short and very few tall, and most of the individuals in the population are average. And we can select individuals that display these traits through selective breeding. So this is what variation means. There's variation in the population. They're not all the same. Then the third step of natural selection is competition. Okay, so individuals are going to have to compete, and in nature they're going to compete for limited resources. The resources are not abundant. We don't have enough food, enough territory, enough mates, enough whatever it is that the animals are desire to go around for everybody. In this African savanna, it may be water during the dry season. So there's a limited number of resources, and those individuals are going to have to compete for those resources. Now, some variations in that population will do better than others. So let's say having a tall or long neck, such as a giraffe, makes those individuals more likely to survive. What will happen is the short-necked individuals will die off, and the long-necked individuals will reproduce, and we will get a new population that has been what's called shifted to the right. And that will make more individuals in the population with tall necks and fewer individuals in the population with short necks. And they say the curve shifts to the right, but actually it doesn't. These traits were actually already here, they just became more popular, and these traits that were already here become less common. So we've shifted the allelic frequency in the population through selective breeding by modeling competition. Okay, the next natural selection in nature, artificial selection for people. The fourth step of natural selection is the winners reproduce. The ones that win the competition, that get the most resources, are going to be the strongest and healthiest individuals in the population. So therefore, they're most likely to reproduce. Okay? And when they reproduce, they pass on these desired traits to the next generation of offspring. We're going to call those the good traits. To the next generation. Okay? So this is how it works. And if you want to be a successful breeder, you need to really kind of model these steps. And unfortunately, this means you're going to have a pretty large food bill, because you're going to have to put puppies on the ground and feed them, and then you're going to have to they're not going to be clones of each other. We're not talking about a cookie cutting factory where it's going down an assembly line and they're all the exact same iPhone 8 whatever, or iPhone 10 whatever. There's going to be variation in each one. There's not a model. It's not a series. It's not a serial code, whatever. Each one is uniquely different. There's no two individuals the same. So what we're going to have to do is look at that variation and find the ones that display the traits that win in the competition, and those are the ones that we want to have. Okay? Now, normally, let me go back to this. Normally, in most registries, what happens is, let me wipe this out. Most registries are different. Actually, I don't know of any registry that's like ours. So what happens in a registration, as soon as the puppies are on the ground, they say, okay, we're going to register your pups. And this is where breeding registrations fall short. This is all they require. It's a one-step program. You get your registration, you get your paperwork, you find another individual of the opposite gender, and you breed them together, and you get puppies, and you can register those pups, and the cycle just repeats. And they don't observe if those individuals are maintaining the traits or not. There is a breed standard, and certain individuals are more desired than others, but the key word here is desired. They're not required, and because they're not required, we get genetic drift in a population, and the phenotype changes and becomes different than what it was originally bred for. Okay, and so working breeds are often desired by individuals that want a healthy, working, capable animal, but then as they become popular, other people that really have no intention of ever working the dog just think it's pretty cool to own one, and they buy a couple and they breed them because some great-great-grandfather or great-great-grandmother down the line was able to do something, and they thought that was pretty cool. And next thing you know, you have pups on the ground, and they're drifting away from the abilities that their ancestors had, and breeds become ruined. So we decided, you know what, we're not going to have this one-step process. It's not just going to be pups on the ground, registration, good to go. The American Sentinel K9 Association, because it is important to me to produce healthy, capable animals and to see this maintained over generation to generation. And what we have done is said registered offspring is not enough. We know that these registered offspring are going to have genetic variation. There's variation in the population again. Okay, so which one of those variants do we want? Well, we have to recognize the individuals that work the best. So they have to compete. Now, by competition, I am not referring to canine sports. Some people say, well, Lee, you've never really entered canine sports. Well, we have a few times, but it has never been our priority. What you need to do is to honestly assess the animals in the gene pool, and you put work on it in front of them, and then you find out which individuals compete and win that work and excel at such work. This is what's important. The problem with some of the sports that are out there is they say they give an honest assessment, and in some ways they do, but in some ways they don't. Okay, it's an honest assessment for that sport, but it's not an honest assessment necessarily for the breed at hand and the objective of the one or the individuals, whether it be one person or a group of people that design that breed. Our dogs, the American Sentinel, is not designed or intended to win sport competition. Do I think they can in the right hands? Absolutely. Okay, we have a lot of desired traits, but I am not trying to breed a dog that can go through a routine and excel at a sport. Okay, and I get a little heat from that from some individuals in the sporting community, but it doesn't really matter to me, and they get kind of dumbfounded that I don't really care. But the reason why I don't care is because I've been doing this for so long that my objectives and goals are part of who I am, and I'm not going to change my objectives or goals to satisfy them. If they want to find out if my dogs are capable, they're certainly welcome to come here and work a dog or buy a dog if they want to, or work out some sort of arrangements of acquiring a dog with me and then seeing if they can or cannot obtain success, because that's their goal. My goal is to produce a family companion guardian, to produce a dog that has a high prey drive, a high pack instinct, a lot of energy, good heat tolerance, some degree of defense to improve reliability for a home guardian type of situation, but it's not to play a game. Okay, and we also do hog hunting to test the physical capabilities of the dog. But my objective is to not play a game. And if someone else wants to play a game to evaluate their abilities as a trainer, I have no problem with that. But please don't expect other people who have had goals for 30 years to change their goals to satisfy your desires. If we want to do those things as electives and novelty things, that's great. But that's not my objective. So, but we need to be honest with ourselves, and we need to say, okay, I'm not going to breed this individual just because I produced it. I'm not going to just breed this individual because I have access to it. I'm not going to breed this individual just because it looks nice, or I'm not going to breed this individual because a lot of people like it and they want pups off of these big dogs, for example. I'm going to breed the winners, the ones that actually excel at what it is that I'm seeking from my dogs. And the ones that excel, those individuals are going to be the most valuable and considered to be the most fit for my gene pool. Okay, and then we identify those individuals by using some sort of honest assessment, and then we allow those individuals to reproduce. So you might say, well, Mr. Robinson or Lee, whatever you call me, that sounds like the same thing as a regular registry. Actually, not at all, because this here is what other registries required. Registered offspring, good to go, a stamp of approval or verification of the traits in the gene pool are not required. Yes, a breed standard does exist, but it's not required for putting the next generation on the ground. For us, before we will allow the offspring to be registered, they have to do the same thing that animals in the wild have to do. Step 3. They have to compete. So how is this relate to the customer that acquires the dog from us? Or how does this relate to when I put pups on the ground here in my own yard and I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do for the years to come? Well, we work mom and dad. Okay, so here's mom and dad, and they reproduce and they have pups. We're going to call that F1. Okay, now these dogs are going to be registered as American Sentinels if mom and dad both display working ability. But if mom or dad does not display working ability and has not been properly assessed, then the pups are not registered unless these pups, as they grow up, can pass that verification, that validation that they have the traits that are necessary. Okay, so now let's go back, and I said if mom and dad can do it, the pups are registered. But just because the pups are registered does not mean you get to breed, or I get to breed them and register the F2s. The F2s are only the second generation. F stands for filial, it means offspring. The F2s are only going to be registered if the parents pass the test. So we have registration, and then that's good for the pups, but it's not good for breeding. Before they're bred, they have to pass a second verification. So tier 1 registered, tier 2 allowed to breed. Tier 1 registered, tier 2 allowed to breed. And this has to happen with every generation. What this does is it prevents people that are just wanting to put pups on the ground and sell them and try to make money, and because of a breed has become a novelty, but they really have no interest in working the dogs. This is going to keep the breeders and puppies and registration in the hands of individuals that do proper selection. All right, so that's that objective. Now I talked about a bell-shaped curve. Now here's something to consider when you're looking at a breeding program. One, make sure that they have proof that their dogs are able to do what they say they can do, because unfortunately in this day and time there's this phrase that's called, what does it say? They say fake it till you make it. How about this? How about get an education and some experience until you have the abilities and knowledge to make it? Don't fake it. Be humble enough to acquire, be humble enough to acquire the skills and education and experience that you need, so you don't have to fake it. How about have real success? Okay, that would be much better. So we have a population of individuals, and let's just say you start off with an average gene pool. I would never recommend that. Okay, why start off with average? Go out and study and find individuals that have the proof in their program that they have a large number of individuals, a high number of individuals that excel. Don't just find the average. Okay, we don't want our average to be here. We want to breed exceptional individuals. And so you need to find individuals. Let's say here's poor, here is average, and here is good. Okay, if you can find great, that's awesome. If you can find the best, that's even better. So you want to find the best individuals that you have access to. So let's just say you've traveled the country, you've met many breeders, and a lot of breeders may have one or two really good dogs, but they don't have a population of good dogs. They have oh, this is good, excuse me, it's backwards on my viewer. So maybe they have a few good dogs, but most of their dogs are average. So what happens, you know, we have most kennels are kind of like this. Okay, they have a couple of good ones, they advertise those good ones, but their breeding stock is kind of average. I recommend that you avoid programs like that and try to find a program that has a large number of really good dogs and maybe a couple of exceptional ones. And if you can find a program that has a lot of really great dogs, then that's a good place to start. You know, we've been doing this for a long time and we have a lot of great dogs here, but because we've been doing this for 18 years, we've been able to move this curve. And so let me describe how that works. What happens is you breed you cull the poor, you make this frequency, these alleles go down, and you reproduce the best. And what happens is you get a new curve. Whoops. Excuse me. You get a new curve. And then after you, that's the first generation of breeding, maybe. Okay, first generation of breeding may have more variation than the old one. In fact, because the band dog is a crossbred, you may have a curve like that. But through selective breeding, you're able to narrow this curve and make changes in the population. So we'll worry about the exact details later. Let me get the general idea. So here's your first generation, and then here's your second, and then here's your third, and here's your fourth, and here's your fifth. And over time, because you're always selecting for better and better, the curve appears to be shifting to the right. But again, what has happened is these traits were here. You've made these in the original population. These traits were here. They just were really rare. And so you've made these traits come up and become more frequent. And you've made these traits disappear. And so they became less frequent. This is what a breeding program is about, to improve the working ability